Okay, well, this conversation is of national importance, all right? There is a looming LI. It will be laid before Parliament tomorrow. And the aim is to give the Trade Minister the power to decide who imports what. As regards some 22 items whose imports they are seeking to restrict or regulate, not ban. Now, they are doing this to solve two problems. One, to reduce how much money we spend on how much foreign exchange we spend on imports, and two, to boost the local production of these things that we import. Okay, will it work? Michael Darko is president of Rice Millers Association of Ghana. Victor Oppong Adjei is the chairman of the Ghana National Association of Poultry Farmers. The two of them are on the phone line. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, and good morning to your cherished listeners.
Wonderful. Thanks for making the time. And of course, we've already said good morning to Professor Ebo Turkson, Associate Professor of Economics and a Development Economist at the University of Ghana. Prof. Turkson, I want to start with you because before we get into the detail of whether or not we can substitute these imports, I would love to hear your thoughts on the economics of it. Not just the theory, but the practicality of restricting these imports and boosting their local production.
Thank you, and good morning to your listeners, and if you have viewers this morning. Yes, I mean, when a country wants to reduce its reliance on imports, there are a variety of ways that the country can go about it. In more meaningful ways that would make the impact felt. At times, if you look at our history, we've tried so many ways of trying to restrict imports. And Kwame Nkrumah's import substitution, industrialization, and all of that to boost domestic production. It didn't work. These import restrictions that you're talking about, we've tried it before, it didn't work. And there were good reasons why it didn't work. And so if today Ghana is discussing a possibility of trying to restrict imports to boost domestic production, we shouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past, and for very good reasons. Now, before you pursue an import restriction policy, not the way that is being laid in Parliament with a group of individuals having the discretion to issue out the imports, whether it's going to be quotas or license or whatever it is. Because there are now new ways of doing that in a way that doesn't distort the market and so on and so forth. The first thing you need to do for an import restriction is to ask yourself, why are you doing that import restriction? If you want to boost domestic production, you need to find out the demand for that product and your local capacity to meet that demand. If the local capacity is not there, the next thing to ask, are you able to support the local capacity to supply? And whatever support you are going to give them, how long is that support going to manifest in their productive capacity? So in the interim, you don't impose a restriction before you decide on these things, because the consumer ultimately is going to feel the impact of that policy. Because if the local capacity is not there, what are you doing? You are trying to restrict the supply, and giving the demand is going to shoot up the prices. It has implications for our imported inflation that will feed into our headline inflation, and that has also its own repercussions on the economy. So when you are coming out with a policy like that, you need to find yourself. So if you have 1 million bottles, let me take mineral water for instance. If there's a local demand for 1 million bottles a day, and your domestic firms have a capacity to produce 400,000 bottles a day. Now, you sit down with the domestic firms and then find out from them Supposing I give you some space, how many bottles can you produce? And they say, oh, we can produce, in our current capacity, we can produce 600,000. The imports are competing, and so that's why we are able to produce 400. Then you know that your full capacity for domestic firms is 600,000. So the 400,000 is what you need to come in. And you don't set up a committee to decide on that. Your central bank can restrict the forex that the commercial banks give for the what do you call it? For the importation of these goods. And you can enforce it in a way that if any import gets to the port and the forex to import that product didn't go through your commercial banks, you slap a fine on that product because you want to use the forex to control how much comes in. So there is no human interface in all of this. The central bank will restrict the forex, knowing the prices of the drinks that come in. They can restrict the forex, and it will bring in almost the quantum of the excess that we need. When that happens, it doesn't necessarily lead to an increase in the price of the product, and you give your domestic firms that freedom that they need to produce. So that is what you do in the first instance. Now, if you want to expand the productive capacity of your firms, you need to find out why they are not competitive. And in that case, what you do is that if you look at the cost of production, what part of their cost of production is coming from policy? Can we hit on the policy and reduce that cost of production? So supposing they tell you that, look, we can compete with the imports, but because of the taxes that we pay on 1, 2, 3, we are producing at $3. The imports are coming at $2. Then the government can say, okay, you know what? We are going to take away those taxes so that it becomes like a production subsidy to the domestic firms, which is not any transfer that the government is giving to them, but government is losing some revenue that it would have collected from them. But you look at the cost that will bring it to the society in terms of inflation, you can sacrifice that revenue that you now call a subsidy so that your domestic firms will produce and sell at 2 and they become competitive. And then once you give those reliefs to them, you challenge them to become competitive by reducing their other cost of production, and you give them targets. And that's what the East Asian Tigers did. They challenged their firms when they were supporting them to become competitive, to become innovative, to become efficient in terms of the cost of production. And so over the years, when they became efficient, there was no need to support them anymore. They competed the imports, and then they chased the imports to their countries where they come from, and then go and compete them there. That is what China did. And that is why China is now very competitive all over the world. These import restrictions that have a human interface they are obnoxious. Nobody is using them these days. They stopped. I hear people make mention of Nigeria. One thing you need to note is that Nigeria's restriction was two-phased. The central bank was giving subsidies for the production of rice. And at the same time, they were using the forex for the importation of rice. And you see, Nigerians have a local demand that can spur production. So we need, and you see, there's also a cultural balance to all of these things. Ghanaians should begin to want to consume made in Ghana products. That is key. Nigerians were successful because Nigerians, as a cultural change, decided that they were going to consume their local rice. And you know, at times, some of our production is demand-driven. When there's the demand for the goods, the producers will produce. So you don't impose these import restrictions just in the name of improving local capacity. You need to find out, and this should be data-driven. It shouldn't be driven by emotions. That, oh, we are too import-dependent, let us cut down on that. It should be data-driven. And these are things that we can easily do.
Yeah.
And when we do these things, we should make sure that it doesn't distort the prices, because ultimately, it is the consumer who will bear the brunt of all of these policies. Because if we restrict the imports and the local capacity is not there, it creates an excess demand, a shortage. And the prices will increase, and the consumers are going to pay higher prices for goods that otherwise they would have had to pay lower prices. It feeds into our national inflation, and it becomes a problem for the central bank to try to bring down that inflation. Yeah. So we need to have data drive these processes, and also to ensure that we are using ways that we can restrict imports without lending ourselves to a situation where a few individuals using their discretion will be giving out these import licenses, and they are by all means going to be abused. It happened in the 60s and 70s where import restrictions were abused. And you can imagine if the Minister of Trade has the sole prerogative of appointing those who should be on the board. I mean, they are going to be political cronies. And I'm not being political. I'm not saying that this government is going to do that. But you see, with the polarized environment that we have in Ghana, I'm very certain that those who will be on the board would be political cronies of whichever government is in power. And if you don't take care, political opponents who are doing good business, who are this thing, would be victimized through that process. And so we need to rethink about this thing. I don't think that there's the need to rush this process.
Right.
Moving Ghana away from import dependence is not going to happen overnight. There's supposed to be a cultural shift in our consumption, and there should be a deliberate policy, a leadership-driven deliberate policy to support our domestic capacity to produce the goods. I've looked at the list. Of course, there are 2 or 3 of them that we should even actually ban them. I mean, why do you import animal stomach? I mean, what sort of import is this? I mean, these things in some countries are not supposed to be consumed. So why do we even use hard forests to go and bring them in? I mean, so when I look at the list, I know certainly that some of them deserve to be there. And that one, we don't need import restriction. We need to actually ban the importation of such goods. I mean, but when you begin to look at things like rice and sugar and poultry, then there are issues that we need to be very careful about. And the Ghana Medical Association will tell you that when you restrict poultry imports and our domestic capacity is not enough, it has implications for nutrition in this country. And when nutritional levels go down, you know what will happen to the demand for medical services. So we should be careful we don't come up with something that is going to be costly to Ghana and will have no potential benefits that we foresee, apart from the fact that those who have the licenses will make much more money. And we know what will happen if they make that money. Precisely. So I think that if you ask me, I mean, yes, I'm not saying we shouldn't restrict, but we should use better ways of doing this. And it should be informed by data, and it should be a gradual process of assessing the domestic productive capacity, the demand, the shortfall, and how we restrict. Using, for instance, a central bank issuing, and a central bank can do that on the quiet. They can tell the commercial banks that, look, we don't need more than $1 million of forex to import maybe, let's say, poultry every month. So when they come, just minimize on that. Right. And that is it. Anybody who brings poultry in that didn't use the commercial banks to import in terms of the forex, then a huge fine is slapped. Right. And that is not an unfair trade practice. It is just to ensure that people abide by the regulations. Yeah. And when you do that, importers will not go out to go and look for forex elsewhere to bring those things in. And you can clearly control how much comes in. And it do not fly in the face of any trade regulation. Right. But when
Prof Ebo Turkson there, and of course he's one of the 3 people we're talking to on this topic. He's an associate professor of economics and a development economist. We'll be hearing from Victor Oppong, Adjei, and Michael Darko as well. But Churchill?
Yes, but Prof, before we get to Michael Darko, you talked about using forex, the Bank of Ghana. How about this way? How about the trade minister determining, for instance, that we can only import, say, these number of metric tons into the country because of the volumes that can be produced locally, and so authorization be given for the volumes that cannot be produced locally to be imported into the country. Does that work?
That's exactly what I'm saying. But I think that should be data driven.
Okay.
And there should be a clear communication that, okay, this is the local capacity, this is the demand, this is the shortfall. So we want to import so much. And then that communication is given to the central bank, and then gives that communication to the commercial banks that, look, we are not going to import more than 100 bags of rice.
Right.
And that is the value. So make sure that those who come for Forex to import rice, we don't go beyond that. And that is a much more indirect way of restricting the imports. But not to allow individuals to issue import licenses. Import licenses are very prone for corruption. Because there's a lot of rent seeking around that. Because there's a lot of profit to be made when you chance upon the license and you are the one bringing in the product. You are going to make a lot of profit. So you are prepared to sacrifice that for rent seeking purposes to get that license. And in this way, you are able to do it. Don't forget that last year, in October 2022, the Central Bank of Ghana came out with a policy like that to try to restrict imports.
Okay.
It was for 6 months. Maybe that has elapsed.
Right.
But we can go back again and try and see how we can do this. And that is the point that I'm making. So, Winston, you are spot on. That's how we go about it.
Right.
So we need to, if this thing has not been driven by data, it's just people thinking that, oh, look, these are the things that we should import. I mean, for sugar and rice and poultry, I have my doubts that if we don't drive this with data, ultimately the cost to Ghana will be much more than the potential benefit that we are looking at.
Well, let's see what we can find out, especially about rice. Michael Darko is the president of the Rice Millers Association of Ghana. Mr. Darko, let's get to it. Assuming nothing changes, right? If you and your association members are to boost your local production with nothing changes as things are today, by how much can you boost your local production? First, tell us how much you're producing at the moment and by what percentage you can boost it.
Thank you very much. I think I have requested just this week from the Ministry of Agric. They are compiling their numbers right before the Farmers' Day. We have an estimate of local production being at about 800,000 metric tons, and our assumption is that about 1.5 million metric tons are imported into the country every year.
So
now, to answer your question, I think yesterday the Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Brian Achampong, also mentioned some local interventions that are being done on the poultry side, specifically with importation of day-old chicks and stuff like that. On the rice side, there's quite an aggressive push towards increasing production of rice. And based on the ministry's estimates and what they are trying to achieve under the PFJ 2.0, we are comfortable that an annual increase of about 15% to 20% is very, very possible.
Okay. Which means that you could be looking at almost about 900,000 metric tons a year from now.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Now, is this information that you have provided the ministry with? Have they come
Correct.
to? Have they spoken to you about this?
I heard Professor Turkson earlier, and I think I've not been involved in any of the interministerial consultations that I assume must have happened before this LI was introduced. But yes, the Ministry of Agriculture and then subsequently the Ministry of Trade and Industry do have this information, and I'm assuming that's the basis under which they have been operating to try and put this LI in place. Now, let me say very clearly that Ghanaians and all of us in general, based on what has happened over the last couple of years, are very suspicious of anything related to government and government interventions. But from where I sit, this LI and its implementation is going to take quite a while for it to come into effect. And so, for me, if you are trying to implement this and you are also doing a parallel intervention locally, whether it's in poultry, whether it's in rice, to make sure that you are increasing your local production, then the whole idea about the LI being something that can be used for rent seeking and corruption and other related issues, there can be solutions around it. But fundamentally, in principle, we agree that some level of import restrictions is necessary, along with growing your domestic capacity in some of these identified items.
What do you do about the culture change issue? Ghanaians have, such a rabid taste for, foreign produced goods. Rice is a perfect example of this, but it goes into almost every area. Even our gods prefer foreign schnapps. So how indeed can we tackle the taste issue when it comes to rice?
That's a very good question. We have done this for the last couple of years. I think we were very successful around 2019 and 2018, 2019, when there was a big push among even some of the media stations in terms of changing the mindset of Ghanaians. We have sent a top challenges of local rice millers and everyone who's trying to improve the whole rice value chain in Ghana to the ministers in charge of agriculture and in charge of trade and industry, as well as to the general government machinery. Now, the first thing that we think can be done is that the public procurement machinery needs to be used to promote and support the local rice industry. Now, what do I mean by that? Government procures a lot of rice in this country. If government will procure rice and pay on time to institutions, and including our senior high schools and all boarding schools, for example, in this country, that is when you start making sure that Ghanaians' mindset and their taste buds are getting adjusted to what we are producing locally. That is the first and very low-hanging fruit that can be achieved and can help with this. The second is that everything is about advertising and marketing. Our taste for foreign goods is because we have been trained and we have seen on our social media, on our TVs, on our radios, and since we were children, certain brands that we associate to be better and that we all aspire to as we make more money. We need to be very conscious and deliberate in our effort to promote Ghana rice. We've gone past the stage where Ghana rice had quality issues. We have a lot of accredited mills in the country now. Private sector guys have invested in mills with color sorters, with destoners, and quality rice is being produced in Ghana. So it's about the government machinery pushing, and then it's about us finding the right investors and marketing to push Ghana rice. And it cannot be over a Christmas season or over the Easter season. It needs to be deliberate and sustainable over a long-term period, as all the foreign imported rice and other products continuously do. You don't see imported items stop marketing. We continue to utilize them, but they continue to market to us on a daily basis.
Who should foot the bill for this marketing drive?
It's a combination. I think from where I sit as a private sector investor in the rice value chain, it's a combination. Government has taken this position and needs to support. Government needs to put in the effort, as I said, through procurement from free SHS to National Food Buffer Stock and all these institutions. Payment has been an issue and needs to be addressed. Then in terms of advertising, it has to be a combination of the private sector and government. Now, when people are putting up mills and struggling to get working capital in this environment, it's hard for them to allocate 100,000 or 500,000 to media stations like yourself to promote their rice banks throughout the year. But this is something that government needs to work with private sector and other organizations around the country and think about it as the long-term benefits for Ghana requires that we sustain this marketing expenditure.
Okay. All right. If you just joined us, we've been talking to Michael Darko. He's the president of the Rice Millers Association of Ghana. We're talking about how to boost local production of this of rice as we look at import restrictions coming in through this LI to be laid tomorrow. We'll be hearing from Victor Oppong, Adjei, chairman of the Ghana National Association of Poultry Farmers. We earlier spoke to Prof. Ebo Turkson. He's also still with us. We'll be learning more from him. He's an associate professor of economics and a development economist from University of Ghana. When we come back from this break, we'll find out the situation with poultry. Now, let's bear in mind that it's not the same as the situation with rice. All right, well, listen, let's get back to our conversation. We've heard from Professor Ebo Turkson, development economist and professor of economics at University of Ghana. Michael Darko is president of the Rice Millers Association of Ghana. Let's now talk to the chairman of the Ghana National Association of Poultry Farmers, Victor Oppong Adjei. So, Mr. Oppong Adjei, I guess your situation is unique. Even the imports are not meeting the demand. And we know how expensive it is to produce at the levels and quantities that the importers are bringing in. We know the advantages in terms of price that the imported chicken has over your locally produced ones. So where do you see yourself in this policy that the ministry is seeking to introduce?
Thank you very much. I'm most grateful. You see, as you really said, our situation is quite different. What is happening is that poultry, we have so many categories and species. But when you come to the chicken, we have the layer and the broiler. The broiler is more lucrative in terms of business than the layer. This is where our challenge is. The imports are taking the market of the broiler. We are not even producing up to 5% of the imports because of the difference in prices. The imported chicken is so cheap that we can nowhere compete with the prices. It's not that our chicken is expensive. It is because the chicken that has been imported to Ghana, you cannot even sell it over there. And the prices in wherever the chicken is coming from, Ghana one is cheaper than what they are bringing to Ghana. So it makes it very difficult for us to compete with the imported ones. Let me make reference to how poultry is impacting American economy. In 2018, poultry impacted American economy by $739 billion.
Wow.
Out of the $739 billion, 75% came from the broiler production. The layer contributed only 6%. So you can see how lucrative the broiler business is. This is where our challenge is. Because we are not able to compete in terms of pricing, all the poultry farmers are producing eggs. And as I tell you now, eggs are choked. They are not able to sell. If you go to any of the poultry farms, you will see eggs over there. So our challenge is that there should be restriction on the import of the broiler, which is the mainstream of the poultry, so that the local producers can also produce. Otherwise, the industry is collapsing. Now, we have about 80% of poultry farmers who are not in operation. So if we get opportunity to produce, it will revamp the industry, and all the empty pens will be filled with chicken. So we have a challenge that the prices that are sold with the imported chicken, they are so cheap that we cannot produce to compete with them. As I said, if you go to Europe, chicken is not cheap. If you go to US, chicken is not cheap. If you go to Brazil, it's not cheap. So how come that when they bring it to Ghana, they can sell it as low as anything? So we have a challenge there.
Can
now,
you tell us the secret? How are they able to do it?
Yes, it's because the chicken that is brought into the country has been stocked for years. It's not fresh. It's not the fresh one that they are bringing here. And that chicken, you cannot sell it over there. You will not be allowed to sell it. But they bring it here without any restriction. And they can sell it at any price that they want, which is now challenging the poultry industry. Now the industry is collapsing. So if you don't do anything about it, you will not get a single poultry farmer in the country, because all of them are producing eggs.
Now,
as I indicated, broiler is the mainstream of the poultry industry. In US, 75% of their income from poultry comes from broiler. Broiler is contributing only 6%.
You've made the point. So Mr. Oppong, here's my question. The trades minister admits that when it comes to poultry, the goal will not be to restrict the import, because he is adamant that this policy will not create shortage. So if even with the imports we are not meeting the national demand, then there's not going to be a restriction anytime soon on the import of poultry. So what could possibly boost local production? Will this policy boost local production of poultry?
Yes, it can. I think we need to have a strategic plan. The one is there is restriction, because the volumes that are coming here is so huge. As I speak now, there are some poultry farmers who are doing some little of the broiler production. But selling them is a problem, because Ghanaians thought, the local poultry is so expensive as compared to the imported one. So that is one challenge. The other challenge has been the cost of feed, which is also very high. So we need to have a strategic plan as to how we can bring the price of the feed inputs like the maize and the soya down. And that's why, in that way, I think we can produce and the prices of our products will come down to be able to meet the market demand.
So that's your suggestion, that even though we are not meeting the national demand for poultry products, that the ministry should still restrict imports and then somehow reduce the cost of inputs, mainly maize and soya, for the feed.
Yes, if you are able to bring the cost of feed down, in that case, our prices will also be lower, and it will be a preference. Ghanaian will choose which one to buy.
Give us an idea of the price
fresh one or the one that has been stored for years.
Give us an idea of the price difference.
Come again.
Give us an idea of the current price difference. Let's take maybe chicken breasts, right? So what's the price difference between a locally produced broiler chicken breast and the imported one?
I tell you, now, as I said, only about 5% of our people are producing broilers. But they don't do the cutting. it's a whole chicken. It's a whole chicken. And that is more expensive than when you go to the supermarkets, the one that has been imported. But we don't do the cutting like the breasts and the wings and the other ones.
Right.
Mostly our farmers, they do the whole chicken. And it's still very expensive when you compare it to the imported ones.
Right. Right. Okay. So for you, the solution is bring down the price of feed, and then that will boost local production, make it cheaper, and then we can start to restrict the imports.
Yeah, that will help us a lot, because if you're able to bring our prices down, then it will be left with the Ghanaian to choose whether they want the imported or the local.
Right.
Because we are giving the fresh chicken, the healthy chicken, and the tasty one. We know that our chicken is the best.
So
it's only the prices that are making the difference.
right.
So if you are able to get feed at a reasonable cost,
Right.
that will bring our end product, which is the chicken, the price down. We will not have any problem with the competition.
Okay. So, Mr. Oppong, assuming that the price of feed is brought down, by what percentage can you increase production of, poultry per year?
Well, as I indicated, now about 80% of our farmers are not in operation. So it means it is going to revamp the industry, and all the farmers will come, especially where we are producing the broiler. But the volume that is coming in is so huge. We cannot use 1 year to meet that demand. At least it should be a sequence. For example, the government is saying next year we are going to produce about 62,000 metric tons. That is very good. It's perfect. Then the following year we increase it to by 20%. Until we realize that we are self-reliant, then you can ban or do whatever. So the way the government is starting, I think, is in the right direction by helping us to start production with 62,000 metric tons of chicken. It comes to about over 40 million birds. But the import is about 600,000 metric tons. So we need to do it in sequence.
Right.
Every year we increase the percentage so that we can meet the demand of Ghanaians.
Okay, I want to say a big thank you to you, Mr. Victor Oppong Adjei, also to Mr. Michael Darko. They are the leaders of the poultry and rice producers groups in Ghana, respectively. Professor Ebo Turkson was speaking earlier, and of course he's a development economist. Thank you all for your inputs.